Our podcast. James here. I'm Royless today. He's out of town, but I am with Rhoni. She's been on before with us. Rhoni Bruhn is our family mentor coordinator here at Christian Heritage. Rhoni, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you, James?
I'm doing good. And for those listening, we're recording this late November here. It's 2:00, and I think I discovered that 2:00 is a horrible time to record a podcast because I'm ready for a nap. Full disclosure. So, but we're gonna give it a go here, and we have a really fun. I say fun. We have a fun conversation. I think an important conversation about boundaries and the holidays. If you missed it a few weeks back, we talked with Amber Kaler, who works here at Christian Heritage, about trauma and the holidays. And we were going to record this last week, but I think, or 2 weeks ago maybe, but I think, Rhoni, you were under the weather, so we didn't get that done. But we still have the month of December here where you're going to be getting together with family and you might need to set some boundaries. And so we're going to talk about boundaries in the holidays. And boundaries, it's one of your favorite topics, I think, Rhoni.
Well, something like that. Sure.
I think you do a good job teaching it.
Thank you.
Now, we'll get into this in a little bit, but I'll just say to start, this is not just for families who have significant trauma or are vulnerable, or for families who are serving people who are vulnerable. I think this is really a topic for all of us because when we think about the holidays and getting together with family, all of us have trauma, right? There's pain, I think, associated with Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, or any significant event on the calendar. And it can be hard. And sometimes we want to say no and we don't know how. And that's why we brought in our resident expert on boundaries, Rhoni, with us today. So, Rhoni, kick us off with this. Just tell us really what piqued your interest in this really important topic. I mean, you teach on it, but you know a lot. You might share a little bit about your own, journey with boundaries, but just what got you interested in this topic? Why do you like to teach on it?
Well, it's so important is why I like to teach on it because I know that I did not understand boundaries early in my adult life, and I landed in a really messy marriage. We were a hot mess, and part of the reason we were a hot mess was because we did not understand what boundaries were, and we had, there were things that he should have been responsible for that I wanted responsibility for. Parts of his life, and there were parts of my life that I needed to take responsibility for, and he wanted responsibility for it. And then there were other parts of our life that neither one of us did take responsibility. And so we had just this very messy, enmeshed, yucky relationship that just ended up turning so ugly and caused so many problems. So that was where I got started. Then as I started and individuals started talking about boundaries with me because they clearly recognized there was no boundaries in our relationship. And so then I started, okay, I'm going to learn about boundaries. And I tried to develop what I'm going to later refer to as strong boundaries, where no, 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 no. I try to get better at saying no, but that isn't necessarily a strong boundary. That's, or a healthy boundary. That was a strong boundary, but it wasn't healthy. And so then as I got into the human services field, and then all of a sudden I did start to see in other people where boundaries were a problem and exactly what that meant. As I have grown personally and professionally, I would say that my definition and my understanding of what a healthy boundary looks like has grown significantly.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What you have a great illustration that you use for boundaries when you teach. So let's just talk about that. What is that illustration? What is a boundary? And then maybe I'll add on, what are some misperceptions about boundaries? And I didn't prep you for that question, but I think you're maybe prepared to answer that. So let's start with the illustration that you use.
So when I think of boundaries, like so many things in our life, happens on a continuum.
Yep.
And so we like I said, I used to believe that a strong boundary was a healthy boundary. So when I think of a strong boundary, I picture a castle. A castle that's complete with, soldiers up at the ramparts with poison darts,
Yeah. Moat
and
with
the
alligators.
the,
Yep.
the alligator infested moat
Yep.
and the drawbridge, and no, you can't come in here. This is my space.
Yep.
No, 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 no. That is a strong boundary, but it's not necessarily a healthy boundary. A healthy boundary is going to keep the bad stuff out. That's what the castle is going to do. No enemy is going to get into that castle. But
Mm.
a healthy boundary also lets the good stuff in.
Yep.
And good things, even fresh air, don't get into a castle. It's all it's all about protection. So on the one side, we've got the strong boundary, we have a castle, and then on the other end, we've got the weak boundary. The individual that never can say no to anybody. The individual that doesn't have the ability to take care of their own needs. It's always yes, 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 yes. That we consider a weak boundary. And I, where we've got the strong boundary is the castle, the
Yep.
weak boundary is a commune.
Mm.
We let everybody in all the time, and we give everything we have to everybody, and we don't take care of ourselves at all.
Yep.
And that also is not a healthy boundary. The healthy boundary is the balance between the castle and the commune.
Yep.
I like to think of the cottage. A
Mm.
healthy boundary has layers. So I think I've got a picture of a cute little cottage with flowers in the front yard and a little low fence. And I think the fence might keep a big grumpy dog out of my yard. So there's a boundary there.
Yep.
There's doors and there's windows, and the windows have screens so you can open the windows or
Mm.
close the windows, and you can let fresh air in, but you can also keep the bugs out. But then if it's cold or stormy, you can close the window so that the storm doesn't get in. But there's layers of boundaries to healthy boundaries.
Yep. I like that. So it's really not like, it's not that you kind of are compromised and
Mm-mm,
sometimes your castle and sometimes your commune. It's kind of just a third way. It's a completely different way to think about it,
absolutely.
depending on the context and the context of the relationship, the context the relationship finds itself in. And so it's really just a different way of thinking about
Well,
life. I'd imagine
that's
most
it.
of us grew up as either a castle or a commune.
Mhm. Yeah, and trauma plays a part in that as well, because some trauma and some people's response to trauma says, "I'm not letting anybody in. I've got to protect myself from
Yeah.
everything and everybody," and that's the castle. And other types of trauma leave an individual, a child,
Yep.
to believe and then to grow into this belief that I don't really actually have the right to have a boundary. I don't actually have any control over my body or
Yep.
over the things that God has given me to control. And so a lot of times these extremes come out of trauma
Yeah.
and pain.
So do you think, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Do you think a lot of us who struggle to say no, we'll just keep, that's like a simple boundary. I think they're probably more,
Mhm.
boundaries are more complex than that. But let's say somebody struggles to say no. Does that mostly come from childhood trauma? Or even not just our upbringing, our family of origin? Do you think that's where a lot of that comes from?
I
It could
do.
have come
I
from
do think so. I think, and then, as we move into talking about holidays, I think that it feeds in there as well. What we believe about who we are, what we
yeah,
believe about what our rights are, what we are supposed to control, what we are supposed to be responsible for. a lot of that comes from the template that was built as we were children, and we see this from our family, and this is the way things are supposed to be done, period. And what was the right way to do things in my household growing up probably looked different than the right way to do things in your household. And so that feeds into just about every aspect of our life. And we have to then, at some point, grow up and mature enough and go, wait, there are actually other ways to handle interactions, to handle conflict, to handle relationships, to handle chores, to handle responsibilities
Yep.
than the way that my family of origin did it. And and maybe there's a better way for me than the way I grew up.
That's really good. So really quick here, like what's a relationship? What's a healthy relationship with boundaries look like?
Well, I think the first thing that I have come to recognize is that the level of health in our boundaries, the level of ability to set healthy boundaries for both individuals in any kind of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a marriage, a parent child, adult child relationship, whether it's work relationship, the ability to set healthy boundaries is mirrored in how healthy the relationship will be. So, your question, what do healthy boundaries in a relationship look like? Well, boundaries, let's define them a little bit. Um, the boundary expert,
Hmm.
and I just lost his name. Um,
Oh,
the-
Henry Cloud.
Henry Cloud.
Yeah.
Yes, I could see his face just as clear as his face, but I couldn't come up with his name. Henry Cloud says that a boundary is like a property line that
Mm,
determines what is mine and what is my neighbor's.
yep.
So if I have healthy boundaries and I'm clearly recognizing where that property line is, there are things that are my responsibility. My responsibility is um, how I respond to conflict. I'm responsible for how I
Yep.
respond to conflict. My responsibilities include when I've got small children, my responsibilities include caring for the needs of my small children and setting appropriate expectations for my small children. My responsibility includes just plain being responsible. Am I working? Am I being productive? Am I being a healthy member of society? Am I caring for myself?
Yep.
If I'm not taking responsibility for the things that are mine, or if I am trying to control, like I did in my first marriage,
Mm,
how my partner handles life, well, now I've jumped ship. I'm no longer working on my responsibilities, but now I'm trying to control someone else. And a healthy boundary controls only me and only the things that God has given me to take responsibility for and to control. If I'm trying to control somebody else's behavior that's not my
yep.
small child, um, then I don't have healthy boundaries.
Mm, yep. We really can't control the small person's behavior anyway, can we?
Well,
So
there is that. But it is my responsibility as a parent to maybe not control it, but to mold and to guide.
yeah, mold it, yeah, help them navigate their all their
Exactly.
behaviors and feelings.
Excellent point.
So when we think about, we'll kind of shift here the second half to holidays and the boundaries, kind of zoom in on holidays. Obviously, it's generally broader in application because anybody who's listening, you are a part of holiday gatherings and things, and there's expectations. And there's, I think, a lot of weight. There's a lot of burden during the holidays. And a lot of us don't feel the freedom to create boundaries. We feel like we have to say yes to everything. So Rhoni, you just from your experience, not even, I mean, it could be from working here at Christian Heritage, but just as a wife, as a mom, as a grandmother, what makes the holidays so difficult for some of us when it comes to setting good boundaries? And then I'll come back to this for the people also who need to hear and accept the boundaries of others. Why are the holidays so difficult for that?
Well, I think that we've already talked about family of origin and the hierarchy of who has the power in a relationship.
Hmm.
So one of the problems I think that comes is when the children are small, who has the power in the relationship? Well, the parents do.
Yep.
And I think that God set things up so that as a child hits a certain level of maturity, that power should be shared in the relationship.
Hmm.
And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't.
Hmm.
And so then we also, I think in Christianity, in faith circles, we're to honor our parents. Well, what does that mean?
Yep.
And so that definition of what it means to honor our parents also has gotten a little bit fuzzy. And in the power differential, if the power differential is not shared appropriately between two adults versus a parent and a child, if that power differential does not get shared, then then we have the hey, the you are to honor your parent.
Hmm.
And because your parent wants you to come home for Christmas
Hmm.
and be at their home for 5 days over the Christmas break, you must honor your parent.
Yeah.
But that is not giving honor to the other adult in the relationship
Yep.
who has other parents that maybe they need
Yep.
to be part of. They may have other responsibilities that they need to. And so these power differentials can dump guilt trips, causes a lot of problems.
That's really good. And I've never thought about it from the power differential perspective, but it makes sense. It becomes hard for people who are parents and then they become grandparents. I know that's your stage of life right now.
Yes.
And that's, I think, a big transition. It's a hard transition that, you know, I don't think there's not as many books out there about how to become a grandparent when
No.
as there are about how to become a parent. College transition is huge. I even think high school. I mean, my oldest daughter's in middle school and she spends a lot of time with friends. I don't know what she's going to want to do on her 2 weeks off,
Right.
for
Right.
Christmas break. I can guarantee you it's not going to be 24/7 with mom and dad. They
Right.
have
Yeah.
people have desires as they get older, whereas my 4-year-old, he's right next to mom and dad all the time. So I think those just what you're getting at when there's that transition to, man, now you're becoming an adult, or now you are an adult and it's a new season, it's a new stage. A lot of it comes down to, man, can I humble myself with my expectations to
Expectations
consider
is a big word when
to
we're talking about
consider
boundaries.
others more important? I mean, Roy and I on this podcast, man, we go back to Philippians 2 so often, but it's so
Mhm.
hard. Can I consider others more important than myself?
Right.
Um, And I think so much of boundaries for the listener, for the receiver, well, I respect this person's property line. They are an individual person. We're all a part of a community. I get that, but they make decisions, and I have to honor that,
Hmm.
even if I don't like it.
Right. Well, and it, it reminds me a little bit. I was just with my daughter and son-in-law for 2 weeks while they prepared for and welcomed a new baby into their home. So they now have three kids,
Hmm.
3.5, 15 months, and now a 2 week old. So the 3.5 year old is at a stage in her life where she loves Bible stories. She loves Bible stories. And she got fixated on the story of Moses and the bulrushes
Hmm.
when I was there. And everybody that came into the house was obviously there to be a character in her acting out of Moses and the bulrushes.
Of course.
And so we had a baby in a basket, and the
Hmm.
baby had to be wrapped just a certain way. And Egypt was apparently my daughter and son-in-law's bedroom, and the Nile River was their bed. And and different individuals that came into the house. The 4-year-old was always Moses's mother. She was
Oh,
always Jochebed. And different people came in to the home for various reasons, and they were pulled into the drama of
hmm.
her, of her life right now,
Yep.
which is Moses and bulrushes. and
Yep.
and so we had people that were Miriam, and we had people that were Pharaoh's daughter, and we had to act it all out, and it was adorable. And in her mind, everybody that came in the house was there for her and to help her act out Moses and the bulrushes.
Yeah.
And that was adorable in a 3-year-old.
In a 3-year-old.
It's not so adorable
Hmm.
when we have a 50-year-old who is insisting that everybody comes to my house and fits into what I want this holiday to look like.
Man, when you put it like that, Rhoni,
It's
that's
it,
good though.
it's the reality of what that often looks like.
Yep.
And then we have, the family members that are saying, I can't do it. I told my mom, I told my aunt, I told my sibling, whatever, that I can't do this. I set boundaries, but they didn't listen to it, so I had to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
What do
there's
you
also there's another problem.
what do you tell someone who has that problem?
The my boundary is for me to set and enforce.
Hmm.
And if somebody else doesn't respect it, that's really okay. My job isn't to make other people happy. Now, that doesn't mean that I need to go around with my life trying to make everybody miserable.
Yep.
But my job is to listen to what God wants me to do, to set my priorities and my schedule and my values and my behaviors according to what I believe God wants me to do. And if a family member doesn't appreciate that and cannot show the respect and honor to me, that doesn't change what my responsibility is with God.
Sure.
So the reality is, if somebody isn't listening to my boundaries and isn't respecting my boundaries, it's not up to the the responsibility is with me to keep my
Yeah.
boundaries. If I give up my boundaries, if I tiptoe over my line and I go ahead and do what I feel like I'm not supposed to do, what
Hmm.
isn't taking care of myself, what isn't honoring my connection with God and my time with God, that's not their fault.
Yeah.
That's on me. That's my responsibility to do that, even if it makes other people upset or uncomfortable.
That's really good. Okay, so here's my question. Let's get really practical. You know, when when somebody's ready to set a boundary, and we all have the boundaries we want to keep. And so again,
Mhm.
let's think holidays in mind. It could be the number of gatherings you go to. It could be screen time for parents with kids, parents, grandparents. It could be sweets. It could be certain kinds of gifts that are given, received. There's all these kind of boundary conversations that happen. How do you go about setting those boundaries? Is it a big conversation? Hey, I have to take you out for lunch so I can have this conversation. Is it in passing? Obviously, it probably depends on the person, the relationship. But how do we encourage people to have those conversations ahead of time? Because I think from my experience, it doesn't work in the moment. And the boundary's been crossed, and you're like, okay, now I got to speak up. It's like, oh, it's too late.
Too
It,
late, right?
it would blow up. So how do you have the conversation ahead of time in a way that's helpful and beneficial?
Great question. And I think you answered the question with, it depends on each relationship and each
Mm,
situation. But boundaries do take planning, and boundaries take practice. So I had uh, a situation back when I worked in Beyond Prison where I worked with a mom who was incarcerated.
Mm.
Her kiddos were being cared for by her mother. So the kiddos were with grandma. And she would have conversations with grandma on the phone, and she would say, my mom won't listen to anything I say, which mom had that option because daughter was incarcerated. So then it was getting close to her time to get out, and I was recognizing more and more that she was terrified of setting any type of boundary with her mother. Again, that power differential had never been adjusted. It had not changed as the daughter grew into adulthood.
Sure.
The mom had still kept all of the power. So I was visiting with her. We were talking a lot about setting boundaries, and I said, you need to practice. We don't start boundaries with the hardest person to set boundaries with in our life. We have to get some success under our belt so that we have a little bit of confidence, so we know what it looks like, what it feels like to be successful in setting a boundary. I said, I really think, you've got other inmates here that you've built a bond with. You have other individuals that you're working with here that you need to set a boundary with there first. Let's start some practicing. We talked about it. The next week I went in to see her. They paged her. She came up and she went, Rhoni, I said, is everything okay? And she said, well, just before I was paged, I asked another inmate to go sit out in the sunshine with me and to just enjoy some sunlight. I said, so this isn't a great time? No, this isn't. No. I said, okay. What's a good time? When can we reschedule? And I went home. And when I got home, my husband looked at me and says, well, I thought you were going to go visit that mom in prison. And I said, well, she had some stuff going on with with another inmate. And he went, a professional came in to work with her and she wanted to spend time with inmates. And I said, absolutely. And I couldn't be prouder of her because I had just told her she needed to set boundaries with safe people. And if I'm not safe enough for her to set a boundary with, then who's she going to set a safe boundary? So that was practice. I saw her the next day. I was back in the prison and she came up to me and I said, I went home and I told my husband I was so proud of you. And tears filled her eyes and she said, I was so worried you were going to be mad. No, you did exactly what. So as we are preparing to set the boundaries with the big kahunas, which may be our parents, we need to start with setting boundaries with safe people. We need to have
really good
community around us. Then when we start having a little bit of experience with setting boundaries, then we need to have a conversation. James, I cannot expect you to know what my boundaries are if I don't tell you.
So what we should have done is we should have had this episode in June so that people could say no to the neighborhood barbecue first.
There you go.
So that by December, they were ready to say, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, I can't come to the 14th Christmas party in December. I can't do that.
There you go.
That's really good. I do like that though. I mean, it's a way to cultivate some emotional courage, just to build up confidence, momentum. Okay, I can do this. Rhoni didn't scorn me after I said that.
The world did not
I can
fall
do
apart.
it again. And then I can say it to my parent, my child, my aunt, uncle, whoever it is. It's usually family. I could see in a work context how, the boundaries are important, not so much for the holidays, right? But usually with the holidays, it's family. And we don't want to disappoint people. I'm a people pleaser. I don't like making people frustrated or angry. I think most of us are wired that way. We want people to like us. And so we get afraid, we get ashamed, and we think, well, I have to say yes, or they won't like me. And I know that is a real legitimate concern for some people where, there might be a family member who cuts you out if you continually put up boundaries. But there are, like you said, there's sometimes like you just have to be able to say, I'm not going to do this. this is my boundary and I want you to respect it.
Well, I also think it's important to recognize that boundaries don't happen in a vacuum.
Yep.
If I'm going to set a boundary with somebody who has been very important in my life, and I don't have anybody else in my life that I know has my back, that I can turn to, that I feel safe and comfortable with, I'm not going to be able to set a boundary with
Yep.
that person that's been extremely important in my life.
Yep.
Because if I'm afraid that that person that's the only person in my life is going to reject me, and I don't have anybody else that I can say, I'm
Mm.
still okay. I still have community. I still have people that love me. We have to have community if we're
Yep.
going to learn to set healthy boundaries.
Yep. All right, last question here. What about for the person who's offended at the boundary? And I'm even going to put a little twist on it. It's not always the best option for the person who set the boundary to confront them or try to make peace. But for the rest of us who maybe are observing the family dynamics, how do we step in to talk to the person who's offended at the boundary? Because you know how it is, Rhoni, like everybody around sees it except for the person who's hurt. And they're like, well, they should say yes, they should come. Why did they say no to that? Yada, yada, yada. But then I or you or another bystander is like, you know what? I understand their boundary. It makes sense to me. How do we approach that person to help them and to uh, just gently prod them, correct them, if you will? How do we approach that kind of conversation?
I think that's a great question. And I think that I don't know if I have the right answer. But I think the first thing that comes to my mind is if you're upset with somebody and you are actively right now hurt and upset because you feel like you've been rejected by a loved one. We've talked about trauma. We've talked about felt safety. We've talked about self-regulation in these podcasts. You're not regulated.
Mm.
At that point, I can have all of the right words, I can have all of the right perspective, I can see the whole situation clear as day.
Yep.
But if I come to you to correct you, you are not regulated.
Yep.
You are in your downstairs brain and you are not going to be responsive. And what I might do at that point is end up putting a wall between you and I
Making it worse. Yep.
and make it so now not only do you feel isolated and rejected by the person who set a boundary with you, but now you also there's a wall up between you and I, and
It's
and
good.
that's not going to be helpful. Time
Mm.
is always good. Sometimes trying to teach in the moment and trying to correct or
Oh
trying
yeah.
to help in the moment is not good.
Sometimes almost never. almost,
Almost never.
almost never.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is time.
Yeah.
And then depending on the level of relationship you have with the individual, once time has passed and there has been some calm, then maybe you can bring it up and you can say, hey, you know, brother, sister, loved one
Mm-hmm.
that I care about deeply, I noticed something. I noticed something here in this situation. And I love you enough to say, um, I wonder if you really recognize
Mm.
what your role in that was. And I wonder
Mm.
if you really recognize, maybe you don't want to say, gosh, you were just acting like Ronnie's 3-year-old granddaughter. Instead of, that's probably not the best
Let
way
me
to
share
say it.
this podcast link with you.
But but the thing is that
Yeah.
it has to start first off when everybody's calm.
Yeah. That's a
And
great reminder.
and and somebody being upset, well, we all hit that.
Yep.
Very rarely does somebody die from being upset.
Yep.
It's just part of our life. So yes, they're upset. Chances are good they're going to calm down and recognize
Yep.
themselves what they had done to their loved one as far
That's
as
good.
pushing the
That's really
boundary.
good. That's great. We'll kind of end it with this, and I might do like a 30-second sermon, TED Talk.
Great.
So I don't want anybody. So I'll get on my little sermon here. I think holidays are hard for everyone. They are. We told our kids actually this last week. You know, you eat a lot of food you don't normally eat, and that affects your body. It affects your brain. And I think we had to say to our kids, hey, holidays can be the greatest days of the year. They can also be the most miserable.
Mhm.
And so when I think of Christmas and the holidays and boundaries and trauma, I want to remember, and so here's my encouragement, my little sermonette. Remember why Jesus came. And I think of Philippians 2. He came to show that I'm going to consider everyone else more significant than myself.
Mhm.
And that's what he did. And he was obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. He gave it all up for us, for you, for me, for Rhoni. And so my encouragement, and I'm talking to myself, is how can I go into Christmas season, into Advent, looking to consider others as more significant than myself? And so
Mhm.
when I receive a boundary or I give a boundary, I can have the mind of Christ that Paul talks about and say, you know what? I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to use Ronnie's breathing exercises here. And I'm going to say, thank you. I need to think about that. And I thank you for having the courage to tell me that, to give me that boundary. Or as if I'm giving the boundary, I'm a little scared to tell you this. It's taken a lot of courage, but I want you to consider A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Here's the boundary. I'd like to ask you to think about that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a way that you can actually live out the truth of what Christmas is all about.
That's
Because that's what
excellent.
Jesus came to. He came to count others as more important than himself, and he gives that gift to us. And so earlier we said it's a lot of expectation, it's a lot of humility, and I'm like, man, how can you live out the truth of the incarnation of the Son of God more than laying down your life and your expectations for the people that you love? I couldn't think of a better way. Okay, so sermon over. My parting words, again, I'm saying that to myself just as much as anyone else. So I hope that's encouraging to you if you're listening. But Rhoni,
Thank
any last words from you? And again, I appreciate what I've learned from you with boundaries. I've told Rhoni this before. I wish I had taken her boundaries session before I got married, before I had kids. It's so helpful. But any just final thoughts you have before we say goodbye?
I think I think the one last thought that I have is boundaries and expectations. We need to respect boundaries, but if we are feeding children candy and carbs and all of the things, then we also need to
Mm,
recognize during the holidays that if I have sabotaged what my boundary is, children cannot play with this or touch this or be in this room. If I've sabotaged it
hmm.
by making the child unable to regulate because of what I've put in this child's body, candy and sugar and extra carbs and not having a space for them to run and wiggle,
Yeah,
then I also need to adjust my expectations of what the child's ability to
that's
follow a
good.
boundary. Um, yeah, I think holidays have such high expectations, which puts everybody on edge.
Yep.
Holidays have such crazy food, which impacts an ability to regulate. And then holidays have, because the expectations are so high, courtesy of advertisements and social media and all of that, we have to just want to be present and enjoy what we have, even if
Mm,
it doesn't fit what our expectations were.
that's good. That's a good final word. Appreciate that. I'm going to remember that from me too.
Yellow. Yeah, definitely. Definitely for me. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Rhoni, for being here. Love having you on.
It's fun to be here.
This is a great conversation. Everybody, as you listen, hope you have a great Christmas season. And I hope something here was helpful. So thanks for listening. Rhoni, thanks for joining. And everybody, we'll see you next